Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Waking Up Cerberus here on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Good morning. I'm Suzanne Sherman. Joining me in our little cyber studio is Daniel Bailey, also Jeff Johnson, two of the founders of the Cerberus Radio Network. Jeff is at the controls. Daniel's standing by. We all have stories to contribute for you today. It is still snowing out here in the Wasatch Back. In fact, all over the Salt Lake area in Utah right now. We've had my email box has been inundated with all these storm and avalanche warnings. I am literally snowed in here. I have been plowing and digging and plowing and digging, getting my truck stuck in the snow for the English speakers. And here we are. This is why we prepare, folks. I could stay here till spring if I had to. Fortunately, I have good friends in our community, and this is all really about so many of our problems need to be solved at the community level. This is why we try to go against trying to solve problems in Washington, D.C. And as you're going to hear in this discussion today, more examples of how futile those solutions top down are going to be. I want to encourage you to follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. Want to welcome new members to our CRN fan page. Really cool to see all these people requesting to join. Welcome, one and all. Thank you to our loyal listeners. In fact, our good friend Andy actually left work early the other day so he could tune in and not miss the show. These people are sharing our posts. Sue, our good friend Sue in Florida, has been just monumental efforts sharing and singing our praises. We so appreciate that. It is Thursday, February 7th, year of our Lord 2019. Lots of stuff to talk about. Again, you can follow us on Facebook. We have a YouTube page. I believe we have a live chat available. Is that up and running, Jeff?
Oh, yeah. I was just saying good morning to people in there.
All right. Well, welcome everybody there in chat. We have a SoundCloud page. So if you're not able to listen to us live, you can always go there, download our shows. Please subscribe, follow to both of those pages, share with your friends. We don't have a paywall. Everything here is free. We would like someday to monetize this if we possibly can get past the tech guru, the wizards over in Silicon Valley and all their restrictions. We're going to do the best we can. Radio Co. You can listen to us 24/7. We have shows going, including The Spy Who Loves Liberty with Greg Carpenter. If you missed his show with his co-host Booger, don't let the name fool you. This guy knows his stuff. That was his handle when he was in the military. So we had two guys that are Army intel talking about what was really going on in Venezuela. If you missed that episode, go and hear that. It is absolutely mind-blowing. Greg Carpenter also has Liberty Minutes. I have Case in Point, where we discuss certain landmark Supreme Court cases. Oh my goodness. And Fundamentals of Federalism. That was awfully brave of me to try that one after I'm botching all the other titles. And let's see, the Mark and Suzanne Show, Revolutionizing Radio, will be back very soon, and the Wasatch Report. We've kind of transformed the Wasatch Report now that everybody seems to be available into this Waking Up Cerberus, because this isn't really a Utah-centric show when we have Daniel and Jeff able to participate. So it's really nice to get their input. Let me quickly share a quick story for those.
Before we go, next week, Greg will not be doing any shows. But everyone, hold on. He'll be back. And a lot of you folks out there know the movie I'm referencing. The needed his expertise, and so he is going to be gone away next week, unning the world. So stand by. The Spy Who Loves Liberty will be back.
I don't think people really are aware of this guy's credentials. I try and tell people, we might be a little the network that could on the internet, too truthful for terrestrial, by the way. This guy is an accomplished author, has a book, Reverse Deception. He is former NSA. He is Army Intel. He is I can't say enough good things about this guy, but listen to him. He really knows his stuff. Don't discount the talent on here because we are a small network. That being said, I just want to
we'll have to call him Dr. Junk Bond.
Yes, he has a PhD now. How impressive.
Well, I think he's still finishing up in his dissertation, but he will soon be Dr. Junk Bond.
Yeah, Dr. Junk Bond. I love that. And he also is a keynote speaker at these major hacker conventions, like in Paris. And I think there's one, what is it, out in Tucson area. He goes to these regularly. Cybersecurity expert. He's our go-to guy whenever we talk about our rights to privacy and to be left alone and not spied on. And he always, always has great commentary. Quickly out of Salt Lake City, Fox 13, Tooele County, Utah. That's just west of Salt Lake City, and that's where my boys live part-time with their dad. He got a house out there. Beautiful area. But Stansbury Park, where they actually live, is really, really getting hammered. I don't know if anybody saw the picture that I shared yesterday on Facebook. There's a woman standing up in a path through snow that's over her head. But this has been the worst snow system that we've had come through here until I think in 11 years. And Stansbury, this whole area, Tooele County, is unique because the wind just comes in across the Bonneville Flats in the Salt Lake area. So, take note of the type of area that you live in and plan when you're in a spot like that to be prepared if you're going to be literally under the weather for some time. So that being said, good morning, Daniel. How are you today?
Hold on, Suzanne. Daniel had to back out for a minute. He had a reset. Evidently, he was having some computer issues, and so he had a reset.
Okay.
Here at the moment. But he will be returning.
Well, Jeff, you shared a really good story from our good friend James Bovard, who's been with us. And once we get our technical issues, yes, we're working on them so we can have guests call in. We'll get him back. But this is a great follow-up to our discussion we had yesterday about the State of the Empire speech. And I listened to it in its entirety, took copious notes, and we had a great discussion on that. If you missed it, again, go to SoundCloud or YouTube and you can download those. James Bovard, who also writes for The Hill, this was republished, Mises.org. I'm gonna read a little bit from this article and then we'll comment as we go because I want to give the true impression that he creates here. In his State of the Union address Tuesday night, President Trump received rapturous applause from Republicans for his declaration. America was founded on liberty and independence, not government coercion, domination, and control. We were born free and we will stay free. But this uplifting sentiment cannot survive even a brief glance at the federal statute book or the heavy-handed enforcement tactics by federal, state, and local bureaucracies across the nation. Amen to that. In fact, James Bovard was on, and we discussed his article and his commentary on Waco. So if you missed that, we should go and find that, and we'll reprint that article as well. Again, this is something after I sent you guys a copy of this meme. There's a picture how I felt after Donald Trump's State of the Union speech. It's a guy riding atop a bald eagle, holding the American flag in one hand, a rifle in the other, soaring over Mount Rushmore, and then bombs exploding behind them. We'll leave that alone for a bit. In reality, back to the article, the threat of government punishment permeates Americans' daily lives more than ever before. Now, this is something I say all the time. The number of federal crimes has increased, I love the way he puts this, from three in 1789 to 4,000 today. Don't we hear this all the time? I remember people saying, oh, pit bull fighting should be against federal law, or if somebody doesn't like something, we should have a federal law, because somehow there's this assumption that state laws or the state justice systems are incapable of handling what are really local offenses. So let's review. What are the three areas of crime the states delegated the general government to punish? Piracy on the high seas, counterfeiting, and treason. I was asked once at the last time I was invited to speak at Patriot Camp out here in Pleasant Grove in Utah, has anybody ever committed treason? A little kid asked me that, and I said, well, according to the Constitution, treason is defined as waging war against the states. Lincoln said He asserted that the states were in rebellion. They never left. So according to that definition, Abraham Lincoln, yes, committed treason. And a mom scowled at me from the back, and I never got invited back to speak about the Bill of Rights there again. Oh, well. Let's see, counterfeiting. We're all operating under a system of fiat currency. Our money is essentially limited, if any, value, thanks to the Federal Reserve. We have lost 99% of the value that our money once had since 1913, I believe it is. And piracy on the high seas, well, that's kind of arguable. We've got the Coast Guard stopping boats all the time under the auspices of the drug war. So, you know, I guess we could sum up the ones that are guilty of all the crimes that originally were prohibited to, or were granted for them to enforce and prohibited by people to do, are being done by the general government themselves. How convenient is that? Let me go back to the article. As I left off, the number of federal crimes, we have about 4,000 today. Congress has criminalized, you're going to love this one. I'm so glad that they're keeping us safe. Transporting alligator grass across a state line. Unauthorized use of the slogan, give a hoot, don't pollute. And pretending to be, get this one, a 4-H club member with intent to defraud. Law enforcement agencies have arrested over 10 million people in 2017, roughly 3% of the population. Boy, that has meaning, doesn't it? That statistic, 3% of the population's been arrested. 3% were responsible for American independence. Going back to the article, Trump momentarily noticed the existence of government coercion last month when he complained about the FBI using 29 people in armored vehicles for the arrest of Roger Stone, but SWAT teams conduct up to 80,000 raids a year, according to the ACLU, mostly for drug arrests or search warrants. Many people have been killed in such raids. I remember also I think a toddler was killed or severely injured in one of those, what was those flash bomb, or what are they called, those grenades that they send into the house, went into a
flashbang.
Flashbang, thank you, went to an infant's little crib. So the other thing too, when he had this woman that was freed, I'll get into Alice Johnson, they had her stand up and showed how he commuted her sentence. You know, we like to take our little puppets and parade them around to show how magnanimous we are, but really what we're doing is expanding government authority. But if we bring out these members of the oppressed class, pick your identity, gender, religion, whatever, and parade them out, and then everybody cheers. So Alice Johnson, unjustly sentenced to life in prison for nonviolent drug offense. Yes, she should have been released. She never should have been imprisoned. Trump's commutation of her sentence is no consolation for the targets of 1.6 million drug arrests in 2017. And it's not like those individuals showed up voluntarily at police stations asking to be cuffed and stuffed. More people are arrested for marijuana offenses than for all nonviolent crimes combined. No coercion? Tell me, or tell that to the scores of thousands of victims of asset forfeiture laws, which entitle law enforcement to confiscate people's cash, cars, and other property based on just what he says, the flimsiest accusation. Again, when we have civil asset forfeiture, by the fact that they call it civil, it absolves them of the responsibility that they would have in a criminal court of law to prove their charges beyond a reasonable doubt. So how convenient is it that they just call this a civil action? Then you can't fight it, and they always win. And as for these SWAT teams, I encourage people to read The Rise of the Warrior Cop by Radley Balco. You know, people talk about posse comitatus and how the military can't act and quell domestic issues on United States soil. Look at Waco. We had James Bovard on here, the author of this article, talking about the presence of Army tanks at Waco. So going back to the article here, federal law enforcement agencies seize more property via asset forfeiture provisions in 2014 than all the burglars stole from homeowners and businesses nationwide. The biggest thieves, the biggest thugs are our government. Going back to the article, since 1970, the number of people confined in American prisons has increased by over 500%. Almost 10% of all American males will end up in prison at some point in their lives, according to a 1997 Justice Department report. More than 10% of Black males aged 20 to 34 were behind bars in 2006, according to the Journal of American History. Citizens and businesses pay more than $3 trillion in federal taxes each year, thanks largely to the array of threats and penalties for non-compliance. Each week, scores of thousands of Americans have their bank accounts seized by the IRS, or have IRS liens put on their houses or land, or endure a tax audit, or receive notice of penalties and demands for additional taxes. Note, if they withhold some of our money and we get a refund, there are no interest and penalties attached to that. The number of different penalties the IRS imposes on taxpayers has increased more than tenfold since 1954. Remember the case of Ms. Lerner, and under her watch, the IRS was weaponized during the Obama administration against conservatives seeking 501c3 status. Their approvals, the reviews, took months longer than it did for others. What happened when she was called to testify before Congress? She took the fifth and went on with her merry life with impunity. Still lives off the tax dollar, I believe, with her pension. Trump perpetuates one of, I want to back up really quickly to the other issue. Going back here, no one has a good estimate of the number of Americans who fall victim to arbitrary and capricious regulations by federal agencies. The Supreme Court, I remember reading about this case in California when the Supreme Court heard the case of the agriculture department's dictates prohibiting raisin farmers from selling much of their harvest in 2014. Justice Elena Kagan suggested that the regime was the world's most outdated law, but there are many other senseless provisions that the media and the court simply ignore. Why? Because there are too many of them. Trump perpetuates one of Washington's fondest myths, that the federal government is not coercive unless the president or some agency boss formally announces there are plans to brutally punish some group without cause. The notion is avidly supported and propagated by many of the nation's pundits and political scientists as a way to keep people paying and obeying. We saw this with the rise of the Patriot Act. Well, if you don't have anything to hide, you shouldn't worry if the government's going to be reading your emails. I remember seeing somebody on Fox, one of those blonde nitwits, saying, oh, well, if you want to get on a plane, you got to submit to the TSA. We need this, otherwise don't fly. A lot of people have jobs and families that require flying. Anyway, let me just finish up this article and then we'll get into our commentary. Trump followed his no coercion here assertion with the following line: tonight, we renew our resolve that America will never be a socialist country. And I know, Jeff, we're going to discuss a thread that was on Mark Cressland's page about this as well, because it was a great discussion. Democrats responded with a stony, if not irritable, silence. We discussed their behavior on our show yesterday. Perhaps the greatest irony in Washington is that people who distrust Trump the most are seeking to vastly increase government power. Let me digress for a moment. This is why I was shouting from the rooftops what a horrible idea national reciprocity is. Some of these morons, these pro-Second Amendment morons that are calling me an idiot because I'm trying to instruct them on the dangers of ignoring federalism, are saying, well, this is our turn now. Finally, we can win. We'll get the Supreme Court. We've got the House. Trump will sign this. We need to do this. Be careful what power you yield to these psychopaths, because here we saw the face of evil the other day. And there was a woman, I'm going to find her tweet feed, that said, we will be in power. She was sitting next to Che Guevara in the audience there. And she said, you should be very afraid of us. Now, Che Guevara already warned somebody against criticizing her because she has the power now of the United States might to call anybody of her any of her detractors before Congress. These people will ultimately gain power. And when you have ceded something like this, our ability to carry firearms, you mark my words, they will take it away. Be consistent. These people are not the ones you want to yield your power here. Democratic socialists have offered no evidence that new federal takeovers of the economy would not produce the same disasters as followed federal domineering of agriculture or the mortgage industry. Instead, new economic prohibitions would create a profusion of victims akin to Eric Garner. Remember him? He was strangled in 2014 by a New York City policeman after being apprehended selling cigarettes without a license. Oh, thank God they took care of him. Crap like this is why we get de Blasio. All right? President Andrew Johnson rightly observed in 1868 message to Congress, it may be safely assumed as an axiom that the greatest wrongs inflicted upon a people are caused by unjust and arbitrary legislation. So true. But the federal statute book and code of federal regulations are the towers of Babel that contain vast numbers of punitive provisions that unjustly ruin or blight other Americans' lives. Trust the Washington establishment to continue pretending that there is nothing to see here in the continuing automatic pilot coercion of the nation. Bravo, James. Really, really fantastic article. I'll let you guys comment. And then, Jeff, I think we're going to address the claim that we are not and never will be a socialist country.
Yes. And welcome back to the people on Radio Co. My computer crashed. I have no idea what just happened. Fortunately, you folks on YouTube and in the live chat had no interruption of the show, and it was continued to air without interruption on YouTube. So it will be up in its entirety on SoundCloud later. I guess the NSA must have remote shut down my computer or something. I don't know, because it just was done. It just stopped. So anyway. Daniel, go ahead and continue with the discussion, because I'm still trying to collect myself.
Yeah, Jeff is asking me what happened. I've got Jeff on listening, sending me a message, what happened. So I'm hoping our broadcast was not interrupted, as you said. So
It was on Radio Co, because Radio Co feed is down.
Okay.
So, but that is back up and running.
Okay.
We're all Radio Co listeners. We're still there. YouTube was uninterrupted, so the recording is continuing, and so it will be on SoundCloud later tonight.
Okay. All right. Daniel, did you want to comment?
Collect myself. That NSA is just all powerful. I mean, I have no idea.
Coincidence? I think not. Jeff, let's go to Mark Cresslin's post the other day, because he addressed very succinctly the claim about not being a socialist country. Do you have that link up, or do you want me to find his post?
I don't have the link up because it's relatively lengthy. Basically, he quotes the president in saying that we are free people and that we'll never be socialist. And then he goes on to list all the socialist programs that we have and prove that we aren't free. I mean, okay, here's everyone out there, stop paying your property taxes and your income taxes. Tell me how free you are.
Jeff, we went to a January 10th broadcast, so I don't know what we're doing now. We'll just keep broadcasting and see what happens. I don't know what's up with Radio Co.
All right. It should be back up as far as I know, because I was just there listening a minute ago, but I'll check after we get done with this. I'm going to go on with this. It is on YouTube Live. If they're not getting it, they can come to YouTube and join the chat. I mean, because there's people here. So anyway, so he goes on to, and so I challenge everyone out there, stop paying your property taxes, stop paying your income taxes, and tell me how free you are. Because I guarantee you, men with guns are going to come and remove you from your house and haul you away to prison. You are not free.
The And also, during my notes, when he said we are not and will never be a socialist country, during the same speech, and we discussed this the other day, what were the programs that he has plans? Jobs, infrastructure, healthcare, prescription medications, pre-existing conditions will be protected, immigration, investing in cutting-edge industry, new standard of living for the 21st century. This is another version of the New Deal. Tell me this is not socialist. Why don't you, and then also Mark Kreslin says, Medicare, income tax, highway transportation funds, borrowed funds to pay for Social Security, the FAA, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Department of Education, NIH, food stamps, the SNAP program, all entitlement programs. Most of what Washington, D.C. does, most of what your state legislature does. Are your kids in public school? You are engaging in socialism. People don't like this truth. I mentioned on some Constitution page, somehow I get into these things and I get tagged. And there's a meme about that. And I said, well, we already are socialist. We embrace it. We send our kids to school willingly. We call the police if there's a problem. We call the fire department if there's a fire. This is all government controlled. Find something in your life that isn't controlled by the government. We like socialism when we've got our guy at the helm, but boy, howdy, we hate it when the other side is in charge. Go ahead, Jeff. Why don't you share that commentary? I was accused of being drunk and high all the time when I commented in that regard. So,
right. So
yeah.
I saw one response. I really didn't pay attention to the whole thread. There was this response. I'm not going to mention the person's name. It's unimportant. His comment was, how are you defining socialist? Some would say that the U.S. is socialistic, but not socialist. Do you think that's a fair distinction? So I replied. I was the first reply. And I said, we have all 10 pillars of communism. I think that's Marxist enough. And Mark Kreslin's liked my response. That was all I said. I didn't go off on a rant, didn't say anything about it. And this guy didn't go off on a rant either, so we're not really going there with this. But it's his response to that one sentence that I just posted that this rant is going to be all about. Based upon this reply and Mark's like of the reply, I'll assume from now on that y'all intend to make zero distinction between socialist, communist, and Marxist. I would have hoped for more nuance, but I guess Facebook isn't the best place for nuance. Seriously, nuance. Oh, let's nuance our Marxism today. We must obfuscate our Marxism so that the masses don't realize how Marxist we are. So I responded, what nuance would you like? More loss of freedom or slightly less loss of freedom? If you want nuance, keep voting Republican Marxist or Democrat Marxist. In the end, you'll be a subject, not a citizen. And about a second later, I thought, so I posted a second one. Here's a good nuance. Let's get the Marxist that only murders babies up to some arbitrary date, and not the Marxist that murders them up to the moment of birth. Good grief, folks. If the people on our side want to nuance Marxism so that we can obfuscate the loss of liberty, and I'm going to quote my guy, the guy on this subject, Mr. Patrick Henry from June 5, 1788.
Love me some Patrick.
Oh, I know. Guard with jealous attention the public liberty. Suspect everyone who approaches that jewel. So let's go back in this because we got to go back here a little bit. Is it worthy that manly fortitude that ought to be characterized by Republicans? It is said that 8 states have adopted this plan. I declare that if 12 and a half states had adopted it, I would with manly firmness, and in spite of an erring world, reject it. You are not to inquire how your trade may be increased. nor how you can become a great and powerful people, but how your liberties can be secured. For liberty ought to be the direct end of your government. Good grief, people. Are we to the point where liberty means so little to us that we must nuance? We must couch our Marxism in pretty little terms. It's socialistic. It's just socialist. It's not communist. It's not really Marxist. It's socialistic. This is the end. We are so royally screwed if the so-called red team is all about nuancing our socialism. We are screwed.
That's what I said the other day. You know, they've already won. It's just a matter of time when our side capitulates to these issues and doesn't want to be consistent in their thought, and they still embrace government control but refuse to call it socialism. Meanwhile, the socialist education system marches on, continues to educate future generations, future elected representatives, as to the evils of capitalism, the evils of conservative thinking, obfuscates the true message of the founding generation. I talked about that the other day. I told you I took my boys out to teach them about real history. Monticello, all about slaves. Montpelier, all about slaves. Of course, we know about the institution of slavery. Of course, we can discuss that in conjunction with these sites and these people. The problem is it has completely dominated the narrative. Raoul Berger, in his book, Government by Judiciary, effectively and unequivocally establishes that we have been hijacked by a rogue federal judiciary. He explains how that happened, particularly through the 14th Amendment. His detractors were so obliterated. His arguments were so effective, they gave up challenging him on the historic level. And instead, now the shift has been to call the founding generation homophobes, misogynists, racists, you name it. Anything to hide the goals that they had and the visions that they had and the rhetoric of Patrick Henry. We don't want to address that. We're going to hide it. All messages lean towards big government. President Trump paraded out and honored some World War II veterans and survivors from death camps in Nazi Germany. I'm not saying these people weren't heroic and brave, but if you have to look back and think, why did this even happen in the first place? These people wouldn't have been standing there but for the Wilsonian interventionism that has caused us to now behave like we are the police of the entire world. Had we stayed out of World War I, it would have been the war to end all wars. Instead, it was the launching pad. I think, Jeff, you had another article you wanted to bring up too, or if you want to comment on more of this, Daniel, Jeff, and then we'll move on.
Did you jump in here on that?
Oh, I was going to go all the way back to the asset forfeiture. I had a question about it.
Yeah, go ahead.
When they do asset forfeiture, do you get to use any of the stuff they so-called confiscated towards your legal defense?
Silly. No.
Yeah, so therefore it's a violation of the Constitution.
You know, the other thing too, and I know this is, I felt so bad thinking about this because I never wish ill on anybody. I never do. You know, with our law enforcement, some people are very anti-police. I am not. And we recently lost a member of our police force out here in Summit County. And the plea was for people to donate and contribute to his family. And I hate to say that this came into my head, but it's like, you know what? Why don't you take some of the stuff that you've stolen from people and give to his family, maybe? It's just, people are getting so angry about the violations, like I talked about in New York City. A guy strangled by police for selling cigarettes outside of their cases, civil asset forfeiture. All of this has people very, very angry, and justifiably so. But what we're seeing now, again, with this kind of violence, and then the violence that erupted in Ferguson and Baltimore, what happens? Well, we're going to just federalize police forces, or we should actually say nationalize police forces. And it's only going to get worse. And how do we finance all this? Civil asset forfeiture. So you're absolutely right, Daniel. I've shared this story. I haven't shared it in a while. My dad is friends with some people, husband and wife, law enforcement in California. And this guy warned my dad, this was a while back in California. We know the at every level, they are bankrupt and the debt is exorbitant. And he said to my dad, when you're driving around, you make sure you don't go a mile an hour over the speed limit. You make sure your tires stop at every single stop sign. You make sure you use your signal. You do not violate one law, because we have been instructed to pull over drivers for any of these infractions. Why? Not for safety. They need the money.
Oh yeah, they're not there to protect. They're there for revenue enhancement.
I wasn't there at the time, but I would have said, and you feel good about that? You're really okay with getting up in the morning and doing your job to stop some 70-year-old man on his way to a doctor appointment to fund your pension? This is where we're at, folks. Go ahead.
I just want to, okay, let's go back to it. You remember the stories in, I believe it was Florida, of the like 80-something-year-old guy that was feeding homeless people, and the cops came up and arrested him for feeding homeless people. Oh, I love me liberty. I love freedom. I love how we're not very socialist, or maybe it's communist, or maybe it's Marxist, or maybe it's socialistic. I don't know. Who cares? I'm sorry. I'm still on my rant from a minute ago.
Yeah, keep going, because I'm going to find an article that says that California legislation has had to force a charitable organization that feeds the homeless. They have to shut down. While you go on, I'm going to find that article.
Oh, and I'm going to, while you're finding that article, I'm going to let you know your good friend, Robin, and I won't go any further than that, is in our chat, and she said hello. So
Hi,
he's listening to you. So you can say hi when you get back.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Anyway, it matters not whether you're talking at the federal level or the state level, or even in this case, city level. We have a level of tyranny that people are comfortable with. And obviously, they'll be willing to defend their level of socialism. And I say it all the time. It is so common. I'm sure most of you are waiting to hear it. You know, it's your Marxism is fine as long as your guy's in charge of the Marxism, and then you're good with it. You know, but Nancy Pelosi's Marxism, oh, evil Marxism, Trump's Marxism, woohoo! Let's celebrate. Let's fly our eagles, have a flag waving and a gun in our hand, and fly over Mount Rushmore and have explosions in the background and chant USA, USA, USA. This is the problem. No one is wanting to defend that jewel of liberty. They just like being comfortable. Daniel, any thoughts before we move on and get on to something else?
to go all the way back to the cop story where they strangled that guy in New York. Do you remember counting how many officers it took to inform this gentleman that he was selling cigarettes illegally?
I don't.
He was surrounded by like 20 police officers because he was selling cigarettes. You're telling me almost the entire precinct had to be there to inform him that he was selling cigarettes illegally? Well, they didn't have anything better to do.
He resisted. And this is what we hear all the time. Don't resist. You know, at what point should we not start resisting and calling this behavior, you know, for what it is? But as I'm looking for this case in California, all these other stories are popping up about health departments shutting down a woman who feeds the homeless. Houston organization shut down for feeding the homeless life because they don't have proper permits. Red Cross during hurricane disaster relief. So you hear these stories all the time that they are coming in and shutting people down. The feds will come in, shut down people that are trying to feed the homeless. You have to have a Red Cross approved kitchen to do this. How do you get approved by the Red Cross? By paying the Red Cross money to get certified. So I think you had another article.
Or you have to go to the city and pay the crown for the privilege to do good works.
Yeah, they don't want citizens, private citizens and private charities solving problems. Again, another link I'm seeing here, federal grants for homeless. All of this goes up. Federal grants, local grants. The government wants to control who feeds these people. Why? So these people will always vote to support the government that will keep their benefits coming in. And what side is that? Well, I can't really say just the Democrats because both parties are doing this.
Right. You know, and that's the thing, Suzanne. The reason we're here is because the church abdicated its responsibility to do these things, to feed the hungry, to give drinks to the thirsty, to clothe the naked. We're commanded by God to take care of those around us. Yet we've given that over to government. And it's no longer charity. It is now compulsion because government must steal from you to do it when you should be giving to God to take care of the problem. And I'm not going to get into let's not get into a religious thing here, but that is where it all stems, that the church has given over its responsibility to government, and now government has to use compulsion to force everybody to give its fair share, or at least those that produce to give their fair share, so the other 50% that don't produce can take that fair share.
I think a better example here would be, instead of calling the federal government or socialist or communist, why don't we just start calling them the Borg? Resistance is futile. You will be assimilated.
Couple things I want to address. Going back to the State of the Union, and I alluded to this woman earlier, Nydia M. Velázquez. She was the gal sitting next to Che Guevara. She said, AOC, Che Guevara, and I, and millions like us, meaning Hispanic women, are the future of this country. Check this out. And you're right to be afraid of us. Here we have another threat from a member of this Marxist party, Eric Swalwell from California. If they don't want to give up their guns, it'll be a short civil war. We have the nukes. Pay attention, folks. Did you see the look on Kamala Harris's face during this State of the Union address? Maxine Waters, I mentioned this the other day. It's payback time. Wait until these people are in control. It is a matter of when, not if. And mark my words, you will regret the power that you have conceded to them.
I think we're in the 1920s Germany now. It's very clear they're going to get power. It's just a matter of when. And when they do, they will follow the same path that Hitler did in the 1920s, 1930s.
You know, and I have to credit Jeff Deist from, he's president of Mises. I actually met him in Dallas when I was there for the symposium on nullification and secession. And he had actually posted about this and called my attention to that. I mean, it's scary. They're not even hiding their hatred towards us. Speaking of hatred, Jeff, you had an article about Antifa and those that were supporting that, what is it, Stone Monument in Georgia?
Right, it's a Stone Monument in Georgia. It's a Civil War. It's actually carved into the mountainside, much like Mount Rushmore, just not on the grand scale of Mount Rushmore. So there was going to be a rally because the leftists want to get rid of it. They're trying to tear down every monument to history because they have to erase our history so that they can control us. As long as we recognize that there is a inherent right to self-determination, and that's what the South practiced. They practiced their right to self-determination. And for those of you out there that think that the Civil War settled it, Jefferson is the one that espoused that in the Declaration of Independence. We seceded from Great Britain and asserted our right to self-determination. Yet somehow, a hundred years later, the South is wrong for doing the very same thing. So anyway, Antifa was going to oppose those people that were going to march in defense of the monument because it's our history. It's there. There's things in history that are bad. It doesn't matter. It's how we go forward from those events in history that were bad and how we go into the future and avoid those problems again. So we had armed Antifa show up, and the people that were going to rally in favor of that didn't show up. So the news was armed Antifa shows up and the neo-Confederates did not. I don't have the article in front of me. It doesn't really matter. It's the principle. So the left, the Marxists, the communists, the socialistic, if we want to make them nice little people, the Nazi brown shirts, because this is what exactly happened in the 1920s in Germany. You had people showing up, the Nazi brown shirts, showing up armed and squashing any resistance. And you have the media. Now, you know, Suzanne, we have a mutual friend down in Alabama that's part of the Sons of the Confederacy, I believe.
Yeah, Carl Jones, Sons of the Confederacy.
Okay, I was trying to keep his name out of it, but
no, that's fine.
He's a big boy and he doesn't mind. I know. But anyway, folks like him would go and protest this. They're not neo-Confederates. They just have a desire to keep history as it was because it's what happened. But the left, the Marxists, make them now, they are evil racists that want slavery again. They're neo-Confederates. They are evil. So they are using the media and now armed people to squash opposing thought. And that is the danger that we're facing today.
And interestingly, again, these were the messages of really, do we have the right to be governed by a system to which the people have consented? That was really the message of the founding generation. That was the message of the states. This is why the education system, the media are so dangerous. They were up in arms over Trump calling them the enemy of the people, but the media really is. They're trying to enslave us. They're regulated. They're given grants by the federal government, and of course, they're going to march in goose step with them. And if you look at the rhetoric even of these articles, they're calling them neo-Confederates and using language, you know, Antifa. They just go Antifa. They don't call Antifa out on their own hypocrisy. But the event is dubbed the Rock Stone Mountain. This was an article on newstoshare.com. Had been planned for months and was expected to attract, now hear this, white national activists, but it was canceled. Antifa Coalition, which donned the name Flower, frontline organizations while working together to end racism, stuck with their original plan to assemble outside the park itself, that it wouldn't allow anyone inside. So here we have, again, a group that says they are against fascism, but engaging in completely fascist behavior, and the media backs them up. I tell you what, I spoke last year at the Sons of Confederate Veterans Education Conference. No one was burning white. No one was wearing white costumes like they were in the House of the Senate of the House the other night for the State of the Union address. There were no crosses burned. Nobody was lynched. These were the most kind, Christian, generous, loving people. There was no racism there. But look how Antifa behaves towards people of color if they have that little red hat that triggers them. This is their religion, and they will throw anybody under their bus who stands in their way, but they'll call themselves a movement trying to seek end racism, but they are the most racist, intolerant group out there. You try to go against their rhetoric. You could be gay. They don't want to hear it. It doesn't matter. This is their cause. The end game for them is absolute control and domination over any remaining freedoms, whatever they may be that we have. Another article was by Think Progress. And this was in response to the event we had. The guy's name was Casey Michelle, and he was at the event and interviewing some people. And what he came out with, in fact, I'm going to have one of the speakers at the event, Alan Mendenhall, an attorney from Alabama, really sharp guy. He wrote me an essay in response to this article, and I'd like to have him on as soon as we can. But they call it Secessionists and Separatists Lay Their Path Towards a Conference and On. And then he puts quotes, nullification, like nullification is somehow an excuse or not a legitimate role that we can be having to fight this egregiously unconstitutional system of government under which we're forced to live right now.
Suzanne, what state was that author in that wrote this, that degraded nullification?
Well, the event took place in Dallas. I actually called him out on a secessionist group that we have and said, you know, you claim to be somebody that purports to support liberty and freedom, yet you know, what is your end game? Because if you are successful, nobody will be free, including the people that you suppose that you claim to represent and fight for. And he never responded. These separatists have found a kindred spirit in Trump's new acting Attorney General, Mark Whitaker. And if you remember, Mark Whitaker did say that nullification is a proper means by which the states can ignore unconstitutional federal laws. This goes back to the Alien and Sedition Acts, the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. This is inherent in our system here. This is our history. But here's what he says here. A day after CNN reported acting Attorney General Mark Whitaker was a supporter of nullifications, allowing states to effectively ignore federal law. Listen to what a liar this guy is. Effectively ignore federal law. What he's saying is a blanket assumption of the supremacy clause here that says federal law will always trump, no pun intended, state law. But there's a caveat there. There's a clause in the supremacy clause in Article 6 that the Constitution and the federal law in pursuance of the Constitution shall be the same, the supreme law of the land. So what that means is if federal law is unconstitutional, not a delegated power under Article 1, Section 8, nor prohibited to it by the states, here we're getting into the 10th Amendment, that it is null and void and without legal effect. These guys can't stand this. So they lie. A conference full of secessionists gathered in a hotel. Listen to this language here. To carry the torch forward. The freaking torch. He used that word, the torch forward. What image does that convey to you? You're thinking right now a bunch of Klansmen in hoods carrying torches to light a cross. The conference was organized by the Abbeville Institute group, founded in 2002, dedicated to a so-called, quote, Southern tradition. What's so-called about that? The Institute has long been associated with white nationalists and neo-Confederacy, not least because its founder, Don Livingston, had previously worked with the White Supremacist League of the South. These people are absolute out-and-out liars, and they get away with this all the time. And the tune of Sunday's conference did little to dissuade those associations. The conference billed itself as the largest secessionist conference in America, entitled The Revival of Secession and State Nullification. The day's festivities took place in an immediate aftermath of Friday's report that Whitaker was apparently a fan of the notion of nullification, a legal principle allowing a state to effectively ignore federal law. Thank you for the half-truth there, Michelle. The concept of nullification has been widely discredited in American jurisprudence. This is why I wrote my article. Don Livingston himself personally asked me, we were all having dinner, to write an article. It's called The Problem with Lawyers and the Constitution. I will give the author that. It's been widely discredited by American jurisprudence because legal industry, the malfeasance of the legal education industry, teaches lawyers the opposite of what the Constitution meant. I call the constitutional law class, they call them con law, not because it's short for con, but it is a con. We are lied to. We are lied to. Whitaker's comments broke out a day before Saturday's events hadn't yet made the rounds among the conference's participants. We think when Think Progress asked one of the speakers about the General Attorney General's comments, the crowd surrounded gasped in excitement. Some of the speakers effusively praised the ideas, while others helped themselves to a raft of free material backing it. One speaker, this is hilarious, Michael Bolden. Michael Bolden, if you don't know who he is the founder, the head of the 10th Amendment Center. The nicest, most genuine, loving people you will ever meet. He used his speech to discuss the state of the nullification movement. Bolden, now consider the source here, whom the Southern Poverty Law Center has described as a political extremist, is the head of the pro-nullification 10th Amendment Center. A political extremist, according to these people, is anybody that believes in a system by which we live under the consent. We consent to the government which is reigning over us. Okay.
See, Suzanne, do these folks even have any idea where the notion of nullification or inapposition came from?
They don't care.
They don't care. And for those of you out there that don't know, read the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions of 1799. Was it 98? 1798. That is where it comes from. Madison wrote Virginia's, Jefferson wrote Kentucky's. So I think our founders had a pretty good idea about this, but these folks don't care.
No. And he quotes here, "It's an historic day. I've always wanted to give a speech on Nullification Day." And they're quoting Michael Bolden, referencing the 18th century Kentucky resolution and nullification. Remember the 10th of November. For Bolden and others in attendance, the notion of nullification remains a preeminent political movement worth following. They take little comfort in the fact that Republicans control the executive branch, both houses of Congress, at least for the next few months, and the current makeup of the Supreme Court. We do not take comfort in that, and for very good reason. We've been discussing that. Why would we? Holy cow, we're out of time almost. For them, the federal government still apparently maintains too much power. This is how stupid these people are. They really don't think that the federal government maintains too much power. If they don't think the federal government maintains too much power, please explain to me this non-stop freaking temper tantrum we have had since Donald Trump has been elected. If you don't think the federal government has too much power, why are you guys having a collective hissy fit? They can't even get their facts straight. The topics weren't limited to just gun rights or abortion laws, but also include things like marijuana legalization and immigration policy. Now, these are the things that we called leftists for. When we say there should be no federal marijuana laws, people call us leftists. When we say that immigration is properly left to the states, we're called liberals. But these people hate anybody that stands for freedom so much they will bunch us all in one big group and call us neo-Confederates. I tell you what, the CSA was on the side of the law. They were on the side of the Constitution as ratified. The general government broke the law. So let's call us something that's bad like neo-Confederates. To me, I think that's a badge of honor. They were the guys that were right. I had a friend that posted something very disappointing yesterday. Again, when you look at the Civil War, which wasn't a civil war at all, under the auspices of left versus right, Democrat versus Republican, he said, Democrats haven't been hurt this much in Virginia since, Virginia Democrats haven't been hurt this much since Gettysburg. And I thought that was a very unfortunate statement. And I said, yeah, the only difference is back then, they were the good guys. So we're out of time. I want to thank everybody that's joined us today. We will be live next week again. We don't have a live show tomorrow, but on behalf of Daniel Bailey and Jeff Johnson here at the Cerberus Radio Network, I want to thank you for listening. God bless.